kind of across the board. We're going to look at some numbers because this was brought up to us last week by some members of the football department in the CPL. Scoring is up this year, boys, through, I believe, 88 games in the 2025 regular season. We're averaging just slightly below 3 goals per game, 2.98, which is pretty comfortably actually the highest number we've seen in CPL history so far. Most other years have hovered around 2.5, 2.6 goals per game, but we've got 262 goals scored so far this year. And we're going to talk about why we think that might be. I've got some stuff to bring up in a minute. We asked a few coaches around the league. Patrice Geyser had some thoughts as well, but maybe I'll start with you guys. Just some early thoughts. Mitch, we've seen a lot of goals this year. First of all, that's a lot of fun. How much are you enjoying that? And second of all, how do you think we could maybe ascribe this to?
I mean, first and foremost, obviously, goals are fun. I'm enjoying the heck out of it. There's been a lot of beautiful goals as well, as there always are in this league. And, there's been high scoring games. There's been obviously a few blowouts, but there's also been, your 5-4s, your 4-4s. Like there's been these games where both teams are scoring a lot of goals, which is the most fun. Certainly for the neutral, maybe not for, the managers of these teams, but certainly for us and the fans watching. You love games like that. There's obviously a number of different explanations. One of the ones I've kind of been thinking about recently is just kind of the tactical and identity shift of a lot of the teams in the league this season. This has really been the year of the 3-4-3 in the CPL, and it's really is a 3-4-3. Like it's not a back five. You have wing backs that are more wingers than they are backs playing, certainly for Athletic Ottawa.
Yes.
But you look at Halifax, you look at York a little bit as well. There's been this kind of shift in mentality. And, these teams, maybe not under Patrice Geyser in the case of Halifax, but, Halifax, York, Ottawa have kind of been some of the cagier teams in CPL history. They have played more defensive football. That's not been the case this year. You see them towards the top of the table in terms of what they're doing, but also I think this shift in mentality from a lot of these clubs and wanting to be more forward thinking, wanting to play more on the ball has led to more goals for not just them, but other teams as well. And that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned some numbers. I looked at it just this morning. We've got 23.98 average shots per game, between two teams, which is the most in CPL history. 2.80 average expected goals in a game, most in CPL history. 42 average touches in the box in every single CPL game, which again is the most in CPL history. So teams are attacking more, they're getting more chances, they're getting into more dangerous areas, which is probably, I think that's a pretty good way to say that we're seeing a lot more goals this year. Now, again, we asked Patrice Geyser about this last week, and he came up with 3 possibilities. The first option he said was he thought coaches are getting better in the CPL. When you see teams so often, you have to find a way to break them down in different ways, and he thinks maybe they're getting a little bit better at that. We do have a couple of new coaches in the league this year, but still, they're all making each other better, pushing each other to be better. He says he sees players improving, and they're being pushed by new additions to the league. We mentioned that our current leading scorer, Sam Salter, record holder now, by the way, he's been in the league a while, but additions like David Rodriguez pushed him. Likewise in Halifax, Thiago Coimbra, again in the Golden Boot hunt, he's been pushed forward by some of Halifax's other newcomers. Patrice mentioned Jason Bahambula, for example, who has kind of contributed to that. And finally, he says that teams have gotten more brave in attacking. He points out how much more, central midfielders are pressing the ball forward. They're getting forward. Lorenzo Caligari is their example. For instance, I think Patrice gave us the example of a late goal that they scored against York, where Caligari wins the ball, goes directly to Wes Timoteo on the flank, and it's straight into the box. It's a goal. AGR, we'll come to you here. Is it any of these 3 that you think is more likely to be fueling more goals? Are there other things that you're spotting? Why do you think we've got such a high scoring season?
Yeah, I think I'd look at a few points. I like his point of the talent. This genuinely just feels like a strong crop of attackers. And I think I think we mentioned it a few weeks ago. Like the CPL has kind of always been known for defenders. The league has had a better, has done a better job selling on defenders because those are the ones who've kind of been noticed. It feels like there's
Yeah.
been this buildup of attacking talent, both in terms of new, right? Like Rodriguez, you mentioned Bahambula. You look across, like, York's completely retooled their attack. Forge as well. They brought a couple dangerous guys from within the league. Like there's been a bit of an impetus there. Even Calvary, like, man, this season they've added just weapon after weapon with Intigny and Saloof and all that. But then on top of that, there's the guys who have stayed, who have grown. The Salters have really developed into proper players. Coimbra, etc. So like the talent's obviously a big factor. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who score the goals. They're the one who are executing the goals. You saw it on that compilation. There's also a lot of skill being scored on the goal, as much as there is getting into the right areas.
Yeah.
I do wonder if another hypothesis is this kind of the combination of the playoff format still also yielding its role, where I think with how important it is, we realized over the last few years with this new format of 1 to 5 and it actually mattering to finish 1 to 5 coaches. Because before, I think with the old 1 to 4 setup where you just kind of got in and it didn't really matter where you finished, if it was fourth or first, coaches just kind of got in. All of a sudden, a mid-August game doesn't. You're thinking, okay, I'm on the road, it's hot, give me that 0-0 or that 1-1 and get me out of here. Whereas now, with this race for top 3, with this race to finish top 2 and host a final or lift a shield now, get your hands on some silverware. That's another obviously very important addition. I wonder if that's pushing teams to kind of go for it in more games, because they're like, well, 3's better than 1. 3's going to get me higher up the table. And in a league where Ottawa is setting the standard in that regard, in terms of wanting to outscore every game, Forge, those two teams are setting the standard. All of a sudden, if you're Halifax, York, and Calvary, you're kind of like, okay, let's try to keep up. And then even for Pacific Valor and Vancouver, then their end, like, all right, we're trying to push for the playoffs. Well, looks like goals are going to be the flavor. I think there's also a bit of the format playing its intended role in terms of making every regular season game more competitive, and there's less of these just slog games where teams don't really want to give up much and kind of sacrifice.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You kind of have to, right? I feel like, again, I don't have the numbers on this specifically, but I feel like we're seeing some kind of more aggressive starts in games, which means teams are scoring in first halves, which means that the other team's opening up, and that kind of unfolds into some of these big high-scoring games that we seem to get. It just feels like every other week at least we have one of these games that just ends up back and forth massively. One team scores 4 or 3 or something. We had a 5-2 game between Valor and Vancouver, who are not the highest scoring teams in the league by any considerable margin this year. And that's just kind of, I think, teams feeding off each other. And as you mentioned, AGR just kind of feeling that pressure to go out and to score goals and to play like that. So, we're not complaining. It's been a lot of fun. I think we're gonna go through the rest of this regular season and maybe see hopefully a couple more games like that. But again, once you do get closer to the playoffs, sometimes you cool off a little bit. Once you sometimes have to get a little bit cagier in some of those 6-pointers. But I do think that there is something to 3 points being much more valuable at this point of the season than 1